and I hope this body does as well. So I urge its adoption. Mr. President, in conclusion, I ask my colleagues' support on these amendments because I believe they will improve the legislation. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The Secretary will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Montana.
I would ask the quorum call be eviscerated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's good to see you in the chair. Mr. President, I'm going to rise to speak on an amendment, Senate Amendment S1145. And in this amendment, I cannot call up at this point in time, but hopefully at some time during this debate, we can deal with this issue of foreign base closures, which is what Senate Amendment 1145 does. I have offered it along with my colleague from Texas, Senator Hutchinson, and it's to establish an overseas basing commission. We're joined in this amendment by Senators Conrad, Wyden, and Sanders. This commission would be charged with saving taxpayer money by identifying and reevaluating our overseas military base structure and investments. It's not a new discussion. This has been done before. In Washington, colleagues from both sides of the aisle have long advocated for issues similar to this one. And in Montana, Senator Mike Mansfield, a personal hero of mine and one of the trusted statesmen of this body, had advocated fiercely throughout his public service for a more common-sense approach to our overseas military commitment. Senator Mansfield's approach balanced our national security interests and decisions and investments that made sense fiscally. The time could not be more appropriate to renew this call. Given our budget outlook, we have a responsibility to exhaustively look for savings across our government. We need to be smart, and we need to work together. It makes a lot of sense to me that cutting overseas military construction projects that have minimal negative impacts on our national security and military readiness is the right thing to do. Mr. President, we know that there is a significant higher cost associated with maintaining facilities and forces overseas, particularly in Europe, than here at home in the United States. We also know that we need a more complete picture of the costs, the benefits, and the savings associated with overseas basing as we make tough budgetary decisions. Given our military's advanced capabilities, it is time for some responsible decisions about how to best secure our country while saving American taxpayers every penny that we possibly can. As Montana families examine their bottom line and as the country works to cut spending, it's past time to give our outdated military bases and installations a closer look. An overseas basing commission would independently address these issues firsthand and ensure that military construction spending and operational and maintenance spending match our capabilities and our national security strategy. As we move forward, I hope we will do so in working in the spirit of Senator Mansfield, by working together and by making common sense decisions that keeps us both safe and spend our taxpayer dollars more wisely. Mr. President, as I said when I opened these remarks, I think this is a no-brainer. We need to take a step back, look at the money we're spending on overseas bases, make sure we're getting the bang for the buck, make sure it meets our national security needs. And with a lot of these post-World War II installations, they can be shut down, we can save some money, and it's a win-win situation for everybody. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Michigan.
President, I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings in the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
President, I was listening in the cloakroom to Senator Tester's comments about his amendment, and I want to tell you how right on point he is in focusing on overseas bases and the need to close some of those bases. We have got another defense bill coming up fairly soon. If we can't get something done on this bill, and I hope we can, whether it's sent to the Senate or otherwise, to put our focus there, because we need to reduce our presence, particularly in those bases, I believe, in Europe, where we just simply can no longer need those bases and cannot afford to maintain them. But whether we can get a commission done is a different issue, because that could actually slow down the process to appoint a BRAC-type commission. But I just want to comment while he was still on the floor that I believe that he is right. He's focused on something which is critically important for not just the Armed Services Committee, but for this Senate to look at, which is to look at the large number, the huge number of overseas facilities we have, and the fact that there are many we no longer need, and that we've got to look there for some significant savings. I just want to commend the senator from Montana.
Senator from Montana.
Yeah, I would like to thank Chairman Levin for his comments. I think that As we look for opportunities to save monies, as we look for opportunities to focus in on the war on terror, I think that our time has come to take a hard look at our overseas basing and do things that, quite frankly, will enhance our opportunities to fight the war on terror while saving the taxpayers' dollars over the short term and the long haul. So I want to thank Chairman Levin for his comments, and with that, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Clerk will suspend. The senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I ask to be able to address the Senate as if in morning business for up to 5 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor of the Senate for the 5th time in the last 3 years to discuss this administration's relentless pursuit to modify and change the labor laws of this country that have served us well for in excess of 70 years. And a particular incident that's going to take place tomorrow causes me to come one more time to discuss this subject. A few days before Thanksgiving last week, the National Labor Relations Board posted a notice that they would meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning to discuss passing a rule that will change a 75-year precedent in labor law, a rule that will reduce the time period between the filing of a petition for a union organization and a vote to as little as 10 days. Historically, in our country, it has been an average of 38 days from the filing of the petition to the vote as whether or not to organize. For no cause or reason other than unleveling the playing field, NLRB has decided to rush this rule through in an ambush-type event. But if you pull the facts back and look, it's quite simply easy to see what's trying to happen. Greg Becker, who was on the National Labor Relations Board as a recess appointment of the President of the United States, was denied approval in the confirmation process in the United States Senate. The President chose to appoint him in a recess appointment which expires at the end of this December. Therefore, in the waning hours of his service on the board, at a time in which the majority has a 2-to-1 vote, they're going to rush through a change and an amendment to the labor laws of the United States of America that have served us for 70 years. It's not right. It's not fair. And at a time of high unemployment and distress in our economy, the worst thing to do is change the rules of the game that have served the country so well. And I will fire a warning shot also. I think there's something else that's probably going to happen before the end of the year. And that is there'll probably be a posting of a rule to make micro-unionization possible. It's already been discussed by the NLRB, a process whereby you could take separate departments in the same company and let them unionize one at a time. Take a Home Depot, for example, or a Kroger grocery store. Let the butchers unionize, then let the bakers unionize, and then let the detergent salesman unionize, and then let the janitor unionize, and let the shop end up having 15, 20, 25 different union organizations in the same store. That's never been able to be possible, and it's not right. It should be across the board within the company. So I just come to the floor today to let everybody know at NLRB that I know what's going to happen tomorrow morning. And I know it's a rush to judgment, and it's a bad judgment, and it's a mistake. We have great labor laws in this country. In fact, if you take this petition change from 10 down to 10 days, you're not recognizing the fact that of all the elections that have taken place in the last couple of years, the unions have won 67% of the time. There is no problem with the organization laws, and there's no reason to compress the time from the filing of the petition to the vote. Fair is fair. A company that has an organization petition filed against it ought to have a reasonable period of time to assess the grievances that are advertised against them rather than compressing the vote period and having a rush to judgment. So I hope tomorrow the NLRB will recognize that a rush to judgment is wrong. It's not good for the country. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for the American people. I will oppose it and do oppose it today, as I will oppose micro-unionization should they attempt to do the same thing before this year is out. And I yield back my time and notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Debate on amendments to the Defense Programs Bill continues. Earlier today, the Senate rejected a Democratic amendment offered by Colorado Senator Mark Udall. It would have removed provisions dealing with the handling of terrorism suspects and would also have required Congress to hold hearings with Pentagon and Obama administration officials. That vote was 37 to 61. Coming up over on C-SPAN in about a half hour from now, a debate on the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. Nearly every Republican member of the House and the Senate has signed the pledge, promising to oppose tax increases under any circumstances. You'll get two perspectives on the issue. Grover Norquist, head of Americans for Tax Reform, the group that sponsors the pledge, and Ross Douthat, a New York Times columnist who argues that the pledges block tax reform and deficit reduction. That live is coming up at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, with the chairman's permission, I'd like to speak on the defense bill. Mr. President, I would ask consent that our defense fellow in my office, Major John Flynn, be granted the floor privileges for the duration of S-1867, the Defense Authorization Bill.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to thank Chairman Carl Levin. I want to thank Senator McCain. I want to thank the entire Armed Services Committee and all of the dedicated staff for their efforts in crafting this National Defense Authorization Act. I am going to continue to work with all of my colleagues to resolve some of the very challenging provisions, one of which we just voted on, having to do with what courts the detainees are going to be prosecuted in. And I'm hopeful that compromises will be reached in the days ahead so that this bill can be passed and signed into law. Mr. President, there are 5 amendments that I and others have offered that I would like to talk about. The first is Amendment number 1210. It has been crafted in consultation with the Government Accountability Office, and it would require the Department of the Navy to evaluate the cost and benefits of stationing initial destroyers at Naval Station Mayport in Jacksonville, Florida. You ask why? Well, there are frigates at Mayport that will be decommissioned in 2015, but the ships that will replace them will not arrive until 2016, and they are the littoral combat ships. And therefore, there is a hiatus that a ship repair industry that has built up to take care of the Navy's fleet for a year is going to be without work. And from the standpoint of keeping the maintenance and repair of the Navy's fleet, we need to determine if it will be more cost-effective for the Navy to mitigate this problem by bringing additional destroyers to Mayport during that time frame, extending the service lives of the existing frigates, or by boosting the industry by bringing ships from around the country to the Jacksonville ship repair industry for repair. If we do nothing, it really isn't an option, because the ship repair business would take too big of a hit, and in order to provide some oversight of the Navy's methodology so that we can get the greatest bang for the buck for keeping the Navy fleet at the level of readiness that it needs, in this amendment, I'm asking for the GAO to assess and report independently. And my colleague from Florida, Senator Rubio, has joined as a co-sponsor, and I urge the support of this amendment, and it should not be a controversial amendment. And I would hope that the committee would be able to accept it. Mr. President, I've also proposed Amendment 1236, which requires the Department of the Air Force to further explain their plan to change the flag officer positions at Air Force Materiel Command. And reducing oversight and eliminating officers with vital experience could damage the Air Force's weapons testing mission. And so this amendment simply requires the Air Force to submit a report which would be assessed by the GAO. Again, this should not be a controversial amendment and ought to be accepted by the committee. Mr. President, Senator Schumer of New York and I are working to ensure that the Departments of Defense and the Veterans Affairs Department continue to study and evaluate the harmful effects of the garbage burn pits at our base in Balad in Iraq. Now, this has gotten some attention in the press, and it is horrible. Of what we're seeing is that when our troops are exposed to these toxic fumes by these open burn pits, well, we see the consequences in their health that turns up later, and obviously is not only a diminution of the health of our troops, which we ought to first and foremost protect, but of course that's a continuing cost to the U.S. government. Because years later, what we're finding is, and this comes out of the first Gulf War experience with those open burn pits, we have determined that serious health problems could be traced back to the breathing in of those toxic substances because the troops were exposed to the fumes coming out of those burn pits. And so what this amendment does, and it should not be controversial, requires a study be designed to take a look at those burn pits and further focus our inquiry on the serious medical effects on our troops. So far, the reports have been inconclusive. But troops are still getting sick, and it needs to be understood, and thus the reason for that study. Next year, we will work to have the actual study funded, but Senator Schumer and I want to get on with this study, and we ask, and it should be accepted by the committee, that is a non-controversial amendment. After all, it's what we all want, the protection of our troops. Let me talk about Amendment 1209. This addresses the long-standing problem faced by relatives of those who have been killed in action or whose death is related to service in the military. And that is the current law of a dollar-for-dollar reduction of Department of Defense survivor benefit plan annuity offset dollar for dollar by the Veterans Administration's annuity amount coming from the dependency and indemnity compensation which comes from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, Senator Inhofe has joined us, and he had filed a standalone bill, and I joined him on that, S-260, and it's co-sponsored, get this, by 49 senators. The Senate has supported eliminating this offset for years, and I hope that in the Senate on this defense authorization bill, we're going to remain steadfast in support of the military widows and the family members. Why? Because the survivor benefit plan is an optional program for military retirees offered by the Defense Department. It's like an insurance plan. Military retirees pay premiums out of their retirement pay to ensure that their survivors will have adequate support when that retired military person passes away. For many retirees, reasonably priced insurance from the public marketplace is not available due to their service-related disabilities and their health issues, and thus the reason for this insurance plan, the Survivors Benefit Plan. And SBP is a way for retirees to provide some income insurance for their survivors, and it pays them 55% of their retired pay. That's for the survivors from the retired military person when that person dies. It's an insurance policy. But along comes another law. The Dependency and Indemnity Compensation, DIC, it's a completely different survivor benefit, and it's administered by the Veterans Administration. When a service member dies, either due to a service-related disability or illness or active duty death, surviving spouses are entitled to a monthly compensation of $1,154 from the Veterans Administration. But here's the rub. Of the 270,000 survivors receiving the SBP, the insurance policy, that the retiree, the military retiree, has paid for, about 54,000 of them are subject to the offset where they are eligible in the indemnity program under the VA. According to the defense actuary, 31,000 survivors' SBP plan is completely offset by the VA's dependency and indemnity compensation. 31,000 people have it offset. They're entitled to both under two different laws, but then there's a law that says you have to offset one from the other. And this means that that survivor that's entitled to both doesn't get the $1,154 from the Veterans Administration that they're entitled to. So military retirees bought in good faith into the insurance plan, the SBP. They were planning for their future, for their families. The government now says, we're not going to make you eligible for the additional compensation from the Veterans Administration. And so what it means is we're not taking care of those who are left behind in the same manner as these service members thought they were going to get when they took care of our country. And I know of no purchased annuity plan that would deny payout based on receipt of a different benefit. And I say that having had some experience, Mr. President, in insurance in my former life years and years ago as the elected insurance commissioner of the state of Florida. Well, I mean, it was said best by President Lincoln, and he said in his second inaugural address that one of the greatest obligations in war is to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. And that's the whole intention of these two laws, but we're not doing it. We're not honoring our service members. The government must take care of our veterans, their widows and their orphans. And almost every year in the Senate, We have passed this eliminating the offset. And what happens, it goes down to the conference and they eliminate it because it's going to cost money. Now, we've had a couple of times important little steps in the right direction with some lessening of the offset. But we must meet our obligations to military families with the same sense of honor their loved one rendered their service to this country. And so we must eliminate this offset. All right, and finally, Mr. President, there is an amendment to sanction the Central Bank of Iran. In just the previous 2 months, Iran has attempted a terrorist attack on U.S. soil while continuing to develop its nuclear capability back home. And it's done so in complete disregard for the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The United States has led the international community in enacting crippling sanctions against the Iranian regime. We need to tighten the screws down more. And we've done so in 1996 with the Iran Sanctions Act, and again in 2009 with the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Divestment Act. And so we must continue these efforts. And by sanctioning the Central Bank of Iran, we will make it clear to Iran's religious leaders, and that's what you really have to say, that there are real consequences to their support for terrorism and their attempts to develop nuclear weapons. A nuclear Iran would be disastrous for the region. It would be disastrous for Europe. It clearly would be a threat against Israel, one of our strongest allies, and it clearly is a threat to the national security interest of the United States. The cost of inaction is too great, and that's why we ought to go after the Central Bank of Iran by sanctioning them. And, Mr. President, I think I have offered a number of amendments along with and on behalf of our colleagues that should be able to be accepted, and I would implore the leadership of the committee to please consider these. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
The Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that the Levin-McCain Amendment number 1092, which is the regular order, be modified with the changes that are at the desk. That amendment addresses the issue of counterfeit parts in the Department of Defense supply chain. Further, that the amendment as modified be agreed to, that upon disposition of the Levin-McCain Amendment, the Senate resume consideration of the Paul Amendment number 1064, that there be 30 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form on the Paul Amendment, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate resume consideration of the Landrieu Amendment number 1115, that there be up to 30 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form on the Landrieu Amendment, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to votes in relation to the two amendments, the Paul and Landrieu amendments, in the following order: Paul number 1064 and Landrieu number 1115, that there be 2 minutes equally divided prior to each vote, that there be no amendments in order to either amendment prior to the votes, and that both amendments be subject to a 60 affirmative vote threshold.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, with the acceptance of this unanimous consent agreement, the Levin-McCain Amendment has now been, as modified, has now been agreed to. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so now before us is the Paul Amendment number 1064 with 30 minutes of debate. I don't see Senator... I'm sorry. I appreciate that. I would also ask unanimous consent that Senator Baucus be added to, as a co-sponsor to our Levin McCain Amendment number 1092.
Without objection.
I also would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that the legislative fellow in the office of Senator Baucus, Air Force Major Jason Wright, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the debate on this bill.
Without objection.
And until Senator Paul gets here to begin debate on his amendment, I just would very, very briefly describe what we have described before, which is the anti-counterfeiting amendment that is so important to stop the flow of counterfeit parts into the Department of Defense supply chain. The amendment is going to do a number of things. It's going to require the Department of Defense and Department of Defense suppliers to purchase electronic parts from original equipment manufacturers and their authorized dealers, or from trusted suppliers who meet established standards for detecting and avoiding counterfeit parts. It establishes requirements for notification, inspection, testing, and authentication of electronic parts that are not available from such suppliers. It requires the Department of Defense officials and Department of Defense contractors who become aware of counterfeit parts in the supply chain to provide written notification to the DoD Inspector General, the contracting officer, and the Government Industry Data Exchange Program or similar program designated by the Department of Defense. It requires enhanced inspection of electronic components imported from countries that have been the source of counterfeit parts in the DoD supply chain, China being the one that is clearly the worst offender in this regard. It requires large DoD contractors to establish systems for detecting and avoiding counterfeit parts in their supply chains, authorizes reduction of contract payments to contractors that fail to develop adequate systems. It requires the Department of Defense to adopt policies and procedures for detecting and avoiding counterfeit parts in its own direct purchases and for assessing and acting upon reports of counterfeit parts from DoD officials and DoD contractors. It authorizes the suspension and debarment of contractors who repeatedly fail to detect and avoid counterfeit parts or otherwise fail to exercise due diligence in the detection and avoidance of counterfeit parts. The amendment also includes a bill that Senator Whitehouse introduced that was passed out of the Judiciary Committee to toughen criminal sentences for counterfeiting military goods or services. And finally, it requires the Department of Defense to define the term counterfeit part, which is a critical, long overdue step towards getting a handle on this problem. I want to thank Senator McCain, who with me held a really significant hearing in the area of counterfeit parts, demonstrating that what is going on here is that electronic waste, which is shipped from the United States and the rest of the world, mainly to China, is then disassembled by hand, washed in dirty rivers, dried on city sidewalks, sanded down to remove part numbers and other marks that would indicate its quality or performance. We have millions, literally, that we've identified of used parts that have gotten into the defense supply chain that are not supposed to be used parts, that are supposed to be new parts. It's amazing how far the counterfeiters, particularly in China, are willing to go. We've asked the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO actually, to use a fake company to go online and buy electronic parts, and the GAO found suppliers who not only sold counterfeit parts. When the GAO sought legitimate parts, they found suppliers who were willing to sell them parts with non-existent part numbers. All those sellers were in China. We had example after example of weapon systems that had counterfeit parts in them. They endanger our troops. They endanger our taxpayers. All too often, the people who pay for the replacement of counterfeit parts are the taxpayers instead of the contractors. That is going to end under our bill. And so all of the weapons that we identified, lasers that were used for targeting Hellfire missiles, display units that were used in the Air Force's aircraft, the C-27Js, C-130J, C-17, CH-47s used by the 46s used by the Marine Corps. Those counterfeit parts have gotten into those systems. We're going to put an end to this with this legislation, and I want to thank my good friend Senator McCain for all the work that he and his staff and my staff put in on that hearing and preparing this amendment, which we have now adopted.
The Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Levin and our staff for the thorough job of investigation that was undertaken to identify the counterfeit electronic parts that are penetrating the Department of Defense supply chain. I'd like to thank Senator Whitehouse for his provisions, which have been added to the bill from a bill that he had introduced in the Judiciary Committee. At the hearing that we had on November 8th, the committee received additional evidence to supplement an already robust investigative record, and some very serious issues were raised, including the threat counterfeit electronic parts pose to the safety of our men and women in uniform, to our national security, and to our economy, how counterfeits increase the short and long-term costs of defense systems, the lack of transparency in the defense supply chain, and the United States' relationship with the People's Republic of China. I see the senator from Kentucky is on the floor, but I would just like to point out again and emphasize the points that the chairman has made. The problem of counterfeit electronic parts in the defense supply chain is more serious than most people realize. During its investigation, our committee uncovered over 1,800 incidents, totaling over 1 million parts of counterfeit electronic parts in the defense supply chain. Suspect counterfeit electronic parts have been installed or delivered to the military for use on thermal weapon sites, on THAAD missile mission computers, and on military aircraft, including the C-27J, C-17, C-130J, P-8A Poseidon, SH-60B, AH-64, and the CH-46. Now, Mr. President, I don't claim that this legislation will solve the problem of counterfeiting from China, the whole issue of intellectual property and counterfeiting that goes on in other aspects of the world's economy and ours is one that is a very large issue. But at least this is an effort to make sure, as much as we can, that the men and women who serve in our military are not subject to operating systems that could literally endanger their lives, much less the incredible increase of the taxpayers' dollars. So I want to thank the chairman again and his staff, and I can assure my colleagues that this is an issue that we will be following very closely in the days and weeks and months ahead. I note the presence of Senator Paul, and so I ask for the regular order.
There are now 30 minutes of debate equally divided on this amendment.
I wonder if the senator from Kentucky would just yield for 30 seconds, not to take his time, just so I can answer a question which has been asked of me. What happened to the approximately 35 to 40 amendments which we had cleared? Why are they not part of this unanimous consent request? And the answer is because there are a few senators apparently who don't object to the substance of the amendments, but who have other goals that they're at the moment insisting on. That puts in jeopardy the effort of literally dozens of our colleagues to achieve what are in these cleared amendments, and I hope that those few senators would relent.
The senator from Kentucky.
I rise today in support of bringing the Iraq war to a formal end. President Obama has ordered troops home by January 1st. We should rejoice at the conclusion of the war. No matter whether you favor the Iraq war or not, there is a glimmer of hope for democracy to now exist in the Middle East and Iraq. War is a hellish business and never to be desired. As the famous POW and war hero John McCain once said, War is wretched beyond description, and only a fool or a fraud could sentimentalize its cruel reality. This vote today is more than symbolism. This vote today is about the separation of powers. It's about whether Congress should have the power to declare war. Congress vested that power in, the Constitution vested that power in Congress. And it was very important. Our founding fathers did not want all of the power to gravitate to the executive. They feared very much a king, and so they limited the power of the executive. When Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention, a woman asked him, "What have you brought us? Was it going to be a republic, a democracy, a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." In order to keep a republic, we have to have checks and balances, but we have to obey the rule of law. Madison wrote that the Constitution supposes what history demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. The Constitution has, therefore, with studied care, vested the power to declare war in Congress. When we authorize the war in Iraq, we give the President the power to go to war, and we give the power, or the Constitution gives the power to the President to execute the war. All of the infinite decisions that are made in war, most of them are made by the executive branch. But the power to declare war is Congress's. This division was given to make there a division of power, separation of powers, to allow there to be a reluctance to go to war. We have this vote now to try to reclaim the authority. If we don't reclaim the authority to declare war or to authorize war, it means that our kids or our grandkids or our great-grandkids could be sent to war in Iraq with no debate, with no vote of Congress. We've been at war for nearly 10 years in Iraq. We're coming home, and we should rejoice at the war's end. But we need to reclaim that authority. If we leave an open-ended authority out there that says to the President, or any President, it's not this particular President, it could be any President, if we leave that authority out there, we basically abdicate our duty. We abdicate the role of Congress. There were supposed to be checks and balances between Congress and the President. So what I'm asking for is that we reclaim, that Congress, the Senate today, reclaim the authority to declare war. And at the same time, we celebrate that this is an end to something that no one should desire. As Senator McCain has pointed out, as many have pointed out, Dwight Eisenhower pointed out the same thing. If you want to know the hellish of war, talk to someone who's been to war. But that's why this power is too important to be given to one person and to left in the hands of one person, a president of either party. So the vote today will be about reclaiming that authority, reclaiming the authority of Congress to declare war. So I would recommend that we have a vote and that the vote today be in favor of deauthorizing the war in Iraq. It is not just myself who has pointed out this. The first President of the United States wrote that the Constitution vests the power of declaring war in Congress. Therefore, no offensive expedition of importance can be undertaken until after they shall have deliberated upon the subject and authorized such a measure. This has been recognized from presidents from the beginning of the history of our country. The problem is if we don't give it up, that power is left out there, and it's a power lost to Congress. Frank Chodorow wrote, "All wars come to an end, at least temporarily, but the authority acquired by the state hangs on. Political power never abdicates." This is a time to reclaim that power. It's an important constitutional question, and I hope those senators will consider this seriously and consider a vote to reclaim the authority to declare war. At this point, I'd like to reserve the remainder of my time and temporarily yield the floor.
The Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I would like to, first of all, thank the Senator from Kentucky for quoting me. That's always a very pleasant experience as long as it is something that one would admire. On several occasions, I have been quoted in ways that I wish that I had observed what my old friend Congressman Morris Udall used to say is the politician's prayer, that may the words that I utter today be tender and sweet, because tomorrow I may have to eat them. So I want to thank the senator from Kentucky for his kind words. I also want to praise the senator from Kentucky, who is a person who has come here with a firm conviction that he not only has principles, but he intends to act on those principles as an impactful way as possible and represent the people of Kentucky in a very activist fashion, and he has my admiration. And, however, I would rise in opposition to the amendment. I'd like to read from a letter that was sent to the chairman and to me from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense. Quote, "This week, as you consider the National Defense Authorization Act, the Department of Defense would like to respond to your request for views on the amendment offered by Senator Paul, which would repeal the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq. U.S. forces are now in the final stages of coming home by the end of 2011. We're moving to a new phase in the relationship between our two countries, an equal partnership based on mutual interests and mutual respect. While Amendment number 1064 echoes the President's policy, we cannot support the amendment as drafted. Outright and complete, quote, repeal, unquote, of the AUMF-1, which is the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq, AUMF-I meant, withdraws all congressional support for any limited wind-up activities normally associated with ending a war. Thank you very much for your continued efforts, etc." And the Department of Defense sent over an unclassified response that is approved by several members of the Pentagon, and it says, "Although we are implementing the U.S.-Iraqi security agreement in full and pulling out all our forces by the end of the year, we still have a limited number of DoD personnel under the Chief of Mission Authority to staff the Office of Security Cooperation Iraq. Because there may be elements that would choose this time of transition to attempt to do harm to these personnel, it is essential that the Department of Defense retain the authority and flexibility to respond to such threats. The AUMF-I provides these authorities. The administration has worked closely with Congress in circumstances where it has been necessary to rely on the AUMF, and it would continue to do so should the need arise." In other words, and unfortunately, Iraq remains a dangerous place. And we will have the largest contingent of Americans as part of the embassy there as we withdraw our combat troops. Some 16,000 Americans will man our embassy and consulates in Iraq. And unfortunately, there are great signs of instability in Iraq. Al-Sadr has said that any remaining American troops will be a target. The Iranians continue to encourage attacks on Americans. There is significant divisions within the country which are beginning to widen, such as Sunni Shia, the area around Kirkuk, increasing Iranian influence in the country. And I will refrain from addressing my deep concerns that I had before the agreement to completely withdraw took place. And I will leave that out of this discussion because I feel the decision that was clearly made not to keep a residual force in the country, which was made by this administration and was the subject for a debate on another day, has placed the remaining Americans in significant jeopardy. And as I say, that's 16,000 Americans to carry out the post-war commitments that we have made to Iraq to help them rebuild their country after many years of war and bloodshed. So I certainly understand the senator from Kentucky's aim here. The President campaigned for President of the United States, committing to withdraw all our troops from Iraq. He has now achieving that goal, but I think it would be very serious to revoke all authority that we might have in order to respond to possible unrest and disruption within the country that might require the presence, at least on some level or another, of American troops to safeguard those 16,000 Americans that will be remaining in Iraq when our troops withdraw. So I argue that the amendment be defeated. And I yield the floor.
The Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I too will oppose the Paul amendment for the repeal of the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq for a number of reasons, but I think mainly there are just too many unknown, uncertain consequences of repealing this authority, including the need to protect our troops. And I just am unwilling to take this risk during the critical transition period and not knowing precisely what will happen after that transition either. And by the way, Mr. President, I take this position as somebody who opposed the use of military force in Iraq to begin with. Back in 2002, October, when Congress voted on the authorization to use military force in Iraq, I did not support it. I thought it was a mistake to do that and offered an alternative resolution that would have authorized the use of force if the United Nations Security Council supported that use of force. So I take a position here opposing the repeal of the authorization, although I oppose the authorization itself in the first instance. It's an unusual position to be in, but I want to explain why it is that I oppose the repeal of this authorization. First, the drawdown appears to be on track to be completed by December 31st, but there always can be unforeseen circumstances that could delay that date. There's no provision in this bill for the possibility of an extension or a modification of that date. I would be reluctant to see it modified or extended, I must say, but I don't want to preclude the possibility by ending something in advance, ending an authorization in advance of the circumstances arising that might require for days, weeks, months, the extension or modification of the current decision to withdraw our forces by December 31st. Secondly, Mr. President, we just simply do not know the consequences of repealing the authorization. And let me just give a few examples. What about ongoing lawsuits in U.S. courts arising from actions by U.S. personnel that were authorized under this authorization for the use of military force? Would repeal of the authorization for the use of force have an effect? It's unknown to me. I don't know how many lawsuits there are. But what is the impact on this? That's something which surely we should want to know. By the way, Mr. President, we authorized the use of force in the first Gulf War. We did not repeal that authorization. Technically, that authorization continues. It has done no harm that I can see. Third, the Paul Amendment raises issues for our detention authority in Iraq. Now, this is not an abstract concern. Currently, the administration is in the process of deciding how to deal with one high-value detainee in U.S. custody whose name is Ali Musa Dakduk. Now, he is suspected of having organized a 2007 kidnapping in Iraq that resulted in the deaths of 5 U.S. service members. He's also tied to Hezbollah. The United States is relying on the authority of the AUMF, the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq, to continue to detain Dakduk. U.S. officials are still in discussions with the government of Iraq over the ultimate disposition of Dakduk, including possibly releasing him to U.S. custody either in Iraq or somewhere else. Now, repeal of the AUMF could limit the administration's options for dealing with Doc Duke after January of 2012. Would it limit those options? We don't know. Should we pass something as dramatic as a repeal of an authorization at this time without knowing what the consequences are in the real world to our interests? I don't think we can take that chance, and so I would oppose the amendment of the senator from Kentucky.
Mr. President?